Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company, taking a look at some of the guns that they're going to be selling in their upcoming February of 2017 regional auction. Today we're taking a look at a Civil War carbine made by Frank Wesson. Sorry, Wesson. Yeah, I'm sure that's the same as Smith & Wesson, right? I mean, we all know Smith & Wesson. That says Wesson. Well, that's actually kind of how some of the success of this carbine came about. This is actually a first type Frank Wesson carbine. Now, Frank Wesson was in fact the younger son of Daniel Wesson of the Smith & Wesson Company. And even at this early date, U.S. Civil War, Smith & Wesson was a reasonably well-recognized name in firearms, and they were respectable. And so when people heard about a Frank Wesson carbine, a lot of people just kind of assumed, oh, well, that's Smith & Wesson. And then assumed that it's probably pretty good, because Smith & Wesson was pretty good. In reality, well, this wasn't a bad gun, but it certainly benefited from the inadvertent mistaken identity with Smith & Wesson, which was helped by the fact that Smith & Wesson did in fact make ammunition for this gun. So you could have this carbine and have someone hand you the carbine and then hand you a box of shells, and the box has this big clear Smith & Wesson, legitimate Smith & Wesson logo on it, and yeah, kind of a natural assumption that, oh, well, it must be a Smith & Wesson carbine, right? Now, Frank Wesson actually patented this rifle in 1859, before the war, and a second patent in 1862. And what he basically was patenting was this, he's got these two trigger assemblies here, and the front trigger actually opens the barrel, unlocks the gun, the barrel pivots open. In fact, we can just demonstrate that. Barrel breaks open for loading and unloading, close the barrel, cock the hammer all the way, and then the rear trigger drops the hammer. Now, he had manufactured these as sporting guns before the war, and he made them in, what, 32, 38, and 41 caliber rimfire. And seeing an opportunity for a potential military contract, he made this version, the military version, a little bit shorter barrel, a 24-inch barrel, in 44 rimfire, which I should point out was actually a 42 caliber cartridge. A lot of ammunition around this period, and these names often follow through to today. The brass case was the bore diameter, and then the bullet was actually seated inside the case. So the bullet was a little bit smaller than the case, leading to things like 32 caliber actually being .31, 44 caliber actually being .42, that sort of differentiation. The ammunition for this is actually the same as for the Ballard carbines in 44 rimfire, not the same as 44 Henry rimfire. So he managed to sort of get a military contract. He sold all of 150 of them to the United States government, but he also managed to sell 4,000 to 5,000 to a couple of different state militias. So these were purchased and used by Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, and I believe Illinois, who purchased them and liked them. And it's interesting that while in the United States Civil War, the War Department was really good about sticking to its proven old-style infantry muzzleloader, there was a lot of experimentation with breech-loading cavalry carbines. The cavalry service was able to get a lot of new designs. Of course, during the Civil War, every inventor who had any idea which end the bullets came out of was tinkering with gun designs to try and get military contracts. And while that worked for a fair number of guys with cavalry guns, it never worked for pretty much anyone for the infantry. Well, it's a single-shot rimfire, so it's not going to be all that difficult to operate. We have a half-cock notch, front trigger, pops the barrel open. This thing right here is just a little nub on the side of the barrel that runs in this track that prevents it from going any farther open than this. Load a cartridge, close it, pull the hammer back to full cock, and then the rear trigger fires the gun. That's all there is to it. There's this interesting hook on the back, which seems to be for your small finger. I can't imagine that being all that comfortable. That's kind of a weird thing to me, but hey, there it is. Small stock, a pretty narrow butt plate. 44 rimfire wasn't all that powerful of a cartridge though, so I'm sure that worked adequately. We have a rear sight here that can be flipped up or down. The standard battle sight 0 there is 100 yards, and then we have 250 at the bottom of this shield-shaped opening, and 500 at the top. That's used with this windage adjustable front sight. The markings on here are a bit worn, but we have F. Wesson patent. He's got the 1859 patent date on there. And then the first batch of 2,000 of these were made in Worcester, Massachusetts. The second batch of about 3,000 were made for the Kitteridge Company of Cincinnati. And this is a Kitteridge gun. Kitteridge is the company that sold a lot of the militia purchased rifles to the various states. By the way, it's Indiana, not Illinois. I said Illinois accidentally earlier. The states that used these in the Civil War were Indiana, Kentucky, Kansas, and Missouri. So it would really seem like a gun that's this handy, this light, this simple, would probably be pretty popular with the troops. As a matter of fact, it was not. This was a remarkably unpopular gun with most troops, and for one main reason. Let's put that there and pop the barrel open. Take a look at the extractor. Okay, I guess it is in fact a trick question. There is no extractor. Once you fired this, you would have to pry the case out. If you're really lucky, you could just pull it out with a fingernail. More likely, you'd need to use a knife under the rim of the case to pry it out of the chamber. And if you got a particularly sticky one, you'd have to find a cleaning rod, because there isn't one attached to the carbine, and knock the empty case out from the muzzle. So that was really the killer for this in terms of field use. Guys, and clearly, understandably why, guys did not like having a gun that was that difficult to reload. So there are a lot of reports of guys getting fed up and ditching these things, being happy to go to a muzzleloader or anything else they could get their hands on. Because even a muzzleloader you could fire faster than a rimfire carbine that you had to knock the case out with a cleaning rod every time. So this hollow section right here is how the barrel actually locks in place. You can see a latch right down in there, and when I pull the front trigger, what I'm doing is pulling that latch back. That latch is what locks the barrel in the downward position. And I should point out, when the hammer is down, so when you're firing or have fired, the hammer actually blocks that wedge from opening. So you can't open the barrel when the hammer's down. This means that it can't accidentally come open as a result of recoil or pressure from the firing process. So an important and relevant safety feature there. But no amount of safety features is going to overcome the lack of an extractor. I should point out that the lack of an extractor was there not because Frank Wesson was too dumb to understand that extractors were useful, but presumably as a way to reduce cost of the guns. During the war, cost, profit margin, and whether or not you could make the gun appealing to the military were all very relevant points. When these were sold to the US military, they were sold at $23 a piece, which is about the going rate for most other carbines at the time. Wesson probably had a pretty good profit margin on these guns at that price. Now, in subsequent versions of this carbine developed for the civilian market after the war, he did in fact add extractors, so that made them a lot more usable and popular at that point. In retrospect, I find it really interesting to look at just how light and handy a lot of these Civil War cavalry carbines really were. This is a 5 3/4 pound rifle, 24-inch barrel, but less than 6 pounds. This is pretty much lighter than any AR-15 you can make. The lightest ARs, short of really ludicrous things, come in at about 6 pounds. And here we are in the Civil War. Granted, it's a single-shot rimfire gun, but same weight. So very, very handy things to be running around on horseback with, especially compared to the long and rather heavy infantry rifles of the day. Now, and of course, it's also interesting to compare this huge menagerie of different carbines from the period. So if you would like to have this particular one, maybe you're really interested in obscure rimfires yourself or Civil War firearms, this is a Civil War period example. These were manufactured actually all the way until 1888, when Frank Wesson's company finally went out of business. And he made 5 different variants of them. This is one of the first. If you'd like to have it, take a look at the description text below. You'll find a link there to the Rock Island catalog page for this rifle. Unlike many of the guns in this auction, this is a rifle being sold just by itself, so you can take a look at Rock Island's pictures and price estimate and description there on the website. If you decide you'd like to place a bid on it, you can do that right through their website. Thanks for watching.